Thank you much. Welcome to Politically Minded, everyone. We have a fantastic panel. I briefly contemplated attempting to set up a moratorium on mentions of Donald Trump and decided that that would be probably a futile gesture. So consider this your trigger warning, I guess. This panel may make you angry, sad, or inspired, I hope. Anyway, we have a fantastic panel, and let's get them out here right now. Up first, we have the creators and showrunners of The Good Wife and The Good Fight, Robert King and Michelle King. There we go. And his current show on HBO is The Deuce, but you also know him from The Wire, Treme, Show Me a Hero, Homicide, Generation Kill, and a lot of great stuff. It's David Simon. First off, as Caitlin mentioned, one of the great things about the TV Campfire podcast, available for download on iTunes if any of you want to, is how much it's really just a conversation. So if you guys want to start talking amongst yourselves at any point and ignore me entirely, I promise I will not be offended. So.
Well, David just asked us, is there anywhere we don't want to go? Anywhere we don't want to go? So is there, besides Trump, I guess?
Anywhere you want to go, let's go there. And Trump's unavoidable. So. Even if he's in a foreign country and hasn't tweeted this morning. Unavoidable.
I wouldn't know about Twitter.
And that was going to be where I was going to start, David. So what is the current status of your relationship with the social media platform known as Twitter?
I can't tweet. I've been not for a week. But the truth is, I'm going to get back on and I'm going to basically say all the same things that I got thrown off, but I'm going to say them to Jack Dorsey. I'm going to tweet him at Jack Dorsey, the exact same language, and on the premise of, you know, telling somebody they can drop dead is not harassment. It's not. It's certainly. I have no control over, you know, the mortality of other beings. You know, it's not me urging any. I'm not doxing anybody. I'm not saying shit. So I'm just going to say, really, for your policies, you should drop dead. And then I'm going to wait to be.
Yes.
You got the mic there. Oops, to your right.
I'm just going to tell the head of the CEO of Twitter to drop. I'm going to use all the same language that got me banned, and then I'll be banned again. And you know, I think it actually might be healthy for me. It's like if I could just keep myself banned, I think my life might become more ordered.
Well, I have a sort of a horrible question. Is the discourse toxified permanently, do you guys think? How long is it going to take before we can reclaim whatever sort of conversational civility we might have had before 18 months ago or 2 years ago?
Just a guess, but I don't think it's permanent. I think you get someone in a leadership position who shows civility and suddenly everyone changes their tone. I don't think we're stuck here.
It's reached a new level of toxicity, so maybe we'll get out of that, but I think it's pretty bad, and it will always be bad.
What is your sense, David?
I'm worried about the systemic, which is to say, there were always people who could sort of traffic in false premises and memes and slander, but you couldn't slander, you couldn't libel people in the pre-digital era because, you know, in the act of publishing, you made yourself vulnerable. The power of social media has transformed, the reach of it has transformed the way in which you can do business using rhetoric. You can libel people, you can make up Alex Jones, or, you know, I mean, my friend Tony Bourdain, who, you know, took his life a couple days ago, the news wasn't gone an hour before Alex Jones was saying that he was killed by the deep state because, you know, I mean, this is, you're capable, nobody is held responsible in the same way that we were when print and broadcast had to be held legally responsible for what they said. So the tonality is that they've completely bypassed the structure by which we establish empirical truth. We don't, there's an entire construct for leading, and if you've ever talked to somebody who, you know, I mean, I had a conversation with a perfectly normal-looking woman, normal behaving woman, normal acting woman, who nonetheless told me that she didn't know who she was going to vote for because she didn't like Trump, but Hillary had been involved in the murders of 200 people. She'd read it. So, that's a world that is new. And whether or not Trump is beaten or somebody, or we have the next rational leader of the country, everything has to be strained through that. And that's like, I don't know how you get that back in the barn to where vetted truth, people sitting around saying, is this true? Is this fair? Okay, publish it. I don't know how we get back to that.
Are you far enough removed from your time as a journalist that you aren't necessarily wearing that hat anymore when you look at things like this happening, or do you still constantly think as a journalist when you see this?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't say the things online anymore that a journal, I would have to withhold a lot of blunt opinion that I like. There it goes. I just say whatever I want now. So I'm not sure I'm certainly not, my demeanor is not that of a journalist. And television, we're not doing journalism. I mean, we're doing drama. So I'm wearing different hats and I'm behaving differently. But do I look at it with some affection for journalism and with some belief in the elemental necessity of I do. I mean, I think what journalism is one of the few things that's trying to get a handle. Mainstream journalism is one of the few things trying to get a handle on this carnage, on this chaos. It's struggling, and it's up against an array of forces that are unprecedented, but at least it's fighting.
I'm curious about how your process has changed in the past couple of years. I know that I wake up in the morning, and it used to be I could actually just start working, and I could concentrate on what I needed to do. And now there's like a 45-minute to an hour period each day where I have to catch up on everything horrible that I missed and find a way to process it. I'm curious if you guys feel the same thing, and if it's changed your rhythms, basically the rhythms of horrifying life.
Well, the writer's room always spent an hour and a half just around, so it probably has given it more focus in that there's a lot more debate about it. There's a very good blog called Lawfare, which is taking a lot of the issues today and looking at the legal aspects of it and how it's taking away the guardrails, all those cliches. But so there was always a sense of, we have some lawyers in the room, and what does this mean? And the arguments, I mean, everybody's probably left-leaning, but the arguments were more about the original question of how much can you be optimistic, where does this move? So the only process I think has changed is I think it's focused the room more. I do think these are people who find a great value in going someplace to an office and knowing they don't have to ignore what's going on in the news, but it's really the subject of the discussion.
And I think in terms of our shows, it's changed because so much more politics becomes part of the show. I think without this new rhythm, we wouldn't spend so much time looking at the news, and then it wouldn't seep into the show as much as it does now.
And your rhythm?
I just want to say that anybody who can limit the amount of dicking around in a writer's room to an hour and a half has my utmost respect. You're really cracking the whip. Yeah. I mean, I'll just tell by way of an anecdote, I think how sort of startlingly, it's astonishing, I think, how much we took for granted as being the parameters of American politics has been tossed out the window in the last 2 years. I had a pilot order from HBO to do a show on Capitol Hill. And the premise of the show, and the room went to work on this, was Congress was the part that was broken, which is still true. Congress is of all the elements of government, it's the one that is most easily purchased by mass capital. I mean, the price of you'd be astonished how cheap congressmen come, as opposed to, I mean, it's harder to buy and fight your way through populist notions in a presidential election, which is still 300 million. The judiciary is still the judiciary, whether, for whatever it's worth. But Congress has become the point of paralysis and had for, I'm sort of buying into the Norm Ornstein logic of, how bad it got, beginning with the hyper-partisanship after Gingrich You can sort of date it to that moment. So we're like looking at this. We're looking at just this, and we're going to do a story about a mainstream Republican subcommittee chairwoman who's frustrated by the inertia and the brokenness of the system. But we premised it on, Romney will be president, or Kasich, or Hillary Clinton. It didn't matter. Like, there'll be some center left, center right, rationalist, coherent, non-insane person who's the executive, and there'll be this element of pressure, from the money on this institution. We wrote that pilot, and then Trump won, and we threw that pilot out. We started the room over again, and then we thought, well, what is Trump? Okay, well, he's it's basically like he's Huey Long but stupid. So it's like it's a populist, but he doesn't actually believe in even the tenets of populism. He believes in whatever whoever talked to him last, and we thought and so he was sort of remarkably ineffective in our second pilot, and then they passed the tax bill. Like, just rammed that through, and you said, wait a sec, and we threw that one out. So like, we're on our fourth now, and I don't think we can go ahead with this project. Like, we're waiting for the midterms. We're waiting to see what happens. Is there a blowback? Does the system right itself in any remote way? I don't know how to write this. I don't know what the world is. How do I write it? I mean, but I'm looking right at it, and I think you were answering something different, which I agree with, which is, when you're not looking right at it, you're writing other things. All of the politics of the moment do leach in, exactly as you're saying.
Well, you guys had a show that premiered 2 years ago, roughly at this time, that was about Congress and how it was dysfunctional because of bugs and hallucinations and other craziness. Was Braindead like 15 minutes ahead of its time?
We had no idea we were making a documentary.
That's right. Timing is everything.
Well, as you look at that show, though, does part of you wish that you could get it on air now because it would play entirely different in 2018 versus the way it played 2 years ago?
The premise of that show was that the Democrats and Republicans were equally problematic because the bugs from outer space were crawling into the ears of both sides of the aisle and making them partisan. The difficulty now is I do think the Republicans have driven everything off the cliff. I hate to be that partisan. And the Democrats are now like, okay, you're served, now it's our time to return, and we're going to go just as insane. I mean, this is where I probably disagree with a lot of people in the room. So I think it would be difficult because Braindead was kind of saying a plague on both your houses. And I don't know if that's accurate at the moment. But it might be accurate in another 6 months, and then we'll be canceled again. So maybe we should wait till we can be canceled right on time.
But it's just very funny to me how The Good Fight is a show set in our grounded world, and yet the tone of Braindead has made itself into The Good Fight. It's now become the real world tone. That's terrifying, frankly.
I think if you just replace the bugs, the alien bugs, with money, the metaphor holds. So,
I think we were always impacted by, there's a wonderful Mike Judge movie called Idiocracy that when it came out, I was in a theater with like 3 other people and 2 were asleep. And it was like, but what was so good and prescient about that was how comic stupidity can be. But you always have to find an angle on it. And the difficulty, I think, with political shows, because we're pitched quite a few, is that it almost takes it too seriously. It's a thing you kind of have to throw away like a Frisbee instead of, looking at position papers and everything. The problem is no one's interested in the position papers. So what can you find that is entertaining? Clearly, we didn't find the right thing, or we'd still be on the air right now. But to us, it was entertaining that you treat Roger Corman as if it crossed with Patty Chayefsky. What point of contact do they have with each other?
I mean, part of the problem of doing a political show right now is that actual politics is so entertaining and mesmerizing that you're falling short when you're doing fiction. I mean, for whatever else you want to say about the Trump administration, it's extremely well cast. I mean, I couldn't think of Scaramucci. Genuinely, that's a problem in television.
And that's what you were saying, even, that's why you keep breaking the writer's room and going back, is the events are outrunning your ability to fictionalize.
I mean, just to give you an example, we had a moment of a part of a spending bill involving a weapons system. She was on the House Armed Services Subcommittee, and she had managed to shepherd some rational compromise on, we're killing this system, we're going to keep that one. It'll be made here, the parts will be, it was this delicate thing. And we had Trump, who, in the second cast version where we were trying to contemplate Trump, we had him like tweeting something insane that, completely undoes, the last 3 weeks of careful legislative work. That's so pedestrian compared to Trump tweeting the shit that he does, or like, Rudy Giuliani running down a porn star in Israel for this is our discourse. So like here we are like in our little writer's room trying to go like, yeah, a guy like this can't really govern. He's going to be upsetting the apple cart. The apple cart. This guy is like, he's this is farce, except people are really being hurt. So it's like you try to get back to the reasons you were doing the political show, because like, it actually does affect human lives. There's people at the border right now who are being pulled from their kids, and but you're lost in this insanity that is, as you say, jaw-dropping in its entertainment value.
And that's the only thing that guided us to the good fight this season. Sorry to pump, but that we have Christine Baranski's character microdosing and then dosing mushrooms and liquid mushrooms. And so when she watches the news, we're not sure if it's based on the psychedelics or if it is truly the factual news. And so I think that's the only way we found to handle it, was to turn the absurdity into, the point of view of the character. Is she a faulty narrator, or is that truly what Trump's going to tweet out tomorrow?
Well, along those lines, you could have not dived as aggressively into the actual Trumpiness of it all as you did in season 2. You guys went hard after the narrative and after the experience that we're all having, going back to the how you wake up in the morning and experience the world differently now. You got into the Trump derangement syndrome to some great depth. When did you know that you wanted to do that, and was it a want to do it, or did you feel like you just had to, given the characters and the world?
Well, we were really certain about what we wanted to do when we started the second season, and that was to stay completely away from Trump. And then, of course, we didn't.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying, this is the season of hope, because people are going to reach a saturation point. Because what we were finding with Trump is not even that he would stay in politics. He would find his way into writing samples. He would find his way into every aspect of culture. And we thought, well, that's the last thing you want to do, is throw another log on that bonfire. But then it was kind of what everybody was talking about. It was kind of, you had to, what was the position on it that would make it original was our take, which was not what Trump is doing, but how we're all living in this world, this new world that has changed so much in 2 years.
And also, it would have been a lie not to, because we'd established these characters, and one had seen Christine Baranski's character for so many years and knew that she was an ardent liberal. Well, she's going to be talking about this, so it would have been false not to.
Do you even remember what season 2 of the show was going to be if Hillary had won?
Yes, we pitched it to CBS, and they were silent on the phone. We said, it's going to be about tort reform. Yay, tort reform. And it's going to be so that each episode is going to have a climax that is going to get us closer to the issue of tort reform. And they were like,
by the way, you have me. I am your demographic right now.
We had to argue how it's, an existential issue for the law firm because if there's tort reform, they were so polite. They were so, no, they were so, we trust you, but.
I feel like I need to do the Arrested Development narrator voice. The season was not about tort reform. But it also made the show much, much funnier this past season. Did you realize immediately you could not do it without making it, as David said, as farcical as the second season was?
Well, we had our daughter, who was, oh my gosh, 16 at the time, come home and say, have you read the news? And she's a joker. She's a comic, and said, no. She said, well, one of the press secretary just said that, what's his name, Banoff? No. Bannon could fillet himself, could suck his own. And we were like, stop it. This is not, no one would say that on the news. No one, and just, okay, split off SNL from Life. And she was like, okay, you'll find out. And then we're always, one Google alert away from finding out anything. And it was like, oh my. And so we wanted to capture that sense that the news was uncontrollable. And as you said, porn stars, I think we have the line in there about, this is not Woodward and Bernstein. And the last episode is actually almost a shot-for-shot parody of All the President's Men, but with Deep Throat truly being a porn star who doesn't do Deep Throat, but meets in a garage. I mean, what we had to do was play off of the farcical. You're right, it's farcical, so what can you do? I'm not someone who says you can't satirize it because you can't satirize things that satirize itself. Yeah, you can. That's actually what you should satirize. I mean, they need to have, you just need the to be that much bigger to get it.
I'm not following.
David?
I'm not following.
You asked if there was
I
anything
think
we wanted to
whatever
stay
you-
away from. Apparently not.
By the way, and I'm the one that got kicked off Twitter.
David, can you imagine, though, wanting to be reflecting what's happening currently in such a literal and present way as they
I
have
feel like
done?
it is time to.
Your mic, don't forget your mic.
Oh, what mic? Hi. I feel like this is the moment where you got to stand up, and I actually think. I don't mean to bring the room down, but I think this is the moment where the Republic is really tottering. And certain things that we took for granted as being inherently implausible and beyond the pale for the American political construct are now on the table. And so I think if you're trying to occupy public space with narrative, whether it's television or film or art or journalism I think if you're not speaking to this, you're missing a moment that is you're obligated to. I think we all are. I'm not saying that all art has to be political, but all art inevitably is political on some measure of the spectrum. And I think if you're not attending to what's happening now, you're going to be judged. I really believe that. I mean, I think you're seeing things happen in the society now that are really brutalizing, and I'm astonished at the normalcy with which things are happening and how people regard it as being like, yeah, well, let's discuss that. And I'm like, what is there to discuss? We're now at the point of, I mean, what I got tossed off Twitter for was basically the wave of people, Trumpites or bots or whatever was in support of this, were saying, we've always torn children from mothers and housed them incommunicado. No, we haven't. And they would throw up a picture of the unaccompanied kids that were arriving 2 years or back in 2014 and say, look, here's these kids without mothers. Yeah, but they didn't come with their mothers. We didn't do you're screaming, look at my apple, it's an orange. And you think by virtue of the fact that you keep arriving with the same equation, eventually the apple becomes an orange. And they're right, it does. And so I look at this and I say we have to figure out a way to call this moment what it is. I mean, this is 1933. This is the Weimar. This is nobody imagining the next step. and then everybody laughing because you're saying, oh, you just, you violated the Godwin rule. You just compared, I'm sorry, but like even Mike Godwin is now saying, my rule doesn't count anymore. If you're paying attention, this is how it starts. And I think like, so every time I'm, this is kind of funny because we started a show called Deuce, which is what I'm sort of currently shooting. And at the time we thought, yeah, this is a really smart way of discussing misogyny and sexual commodification. A lot of the stuff that, and we were sort of, thank God, 6 months ahead of the Me Too moment. And now I feel like I just keep getting drawn over to this. Like I'm trying to like deal with this one aspect of this is worth discussing. And so this is occupying my time. And I feel like there's this huge wave crashing down on the entire premise of American society and on our whole capacity for self-governance. So yeah, like we have to figure out a way to speak to it. But all this talk that I tried to answer your question, but like I don't have again, I'm the guy with the pilot that I rewrote 4 times. This is really hard. This is, I don't know what to do. We got to figure it out though.
Well, as you say, you have a show that did anticipate a lot of the conversations that we've been having about abuses of power, about exploitation, and that preceded them being in the cultural conversation. As you were working on the second season, did the cultural conversation sort of bleed back into what you were doing?
We were the 3 seasons we had planned. As we looked at the second season, a lot of what had come up in the Me Too stuff dovetailed almost perfectly. So we felt like the thing I remember saying to each other was, thank God Harvey Weinstein happened 6 months after. And not 6 months before, because I think the first episode of the Deuce would have been judged as, more of the same, when in fact it was a critique of exactly that, using the allegory of, or the historical allegory of the rise of pornography. So, like, I just felt like, man, finally we caught, we would have been canceled, or they would have freaked out. I felt like we ducked the bullet. But I don't think, I think we were on what it is about. I mean, I think it hasn't really changed the content so much. But I do feel like, as I said, we're surrounding something that is a little more ethereal than, my God, the Constitution's unraveling before your eyes. Habeas corpus is disappearing, and they're talking about internment camps, and they're not, I mean, like, I feel like everything that's in the abstract is almost a wasted moment. And that's dangerous because, this I'd really like to hear your views on, because at some point you just got to go out and tell a story. And if you try to put everything you feel politically into the characters or their mouths or the dialogue, it ends up being didactic. It ends up not being good. So at some point you have to sort of, not think about everything you want to say politically and force it down the gullets of your characters. So maybe it's a good thing that I'm not busy designing the exact show to answer to Trump, because it might be terrible, but it'd be terrible drama.
Do you feel it's difficult to be doing a period show right now, or do you feel like that's a benefit to you? Benefit,
yeah. I mean, if I was doing a Me Too show about Hollywood right now, that's just too fraught and everybody's connecting little dots between yesterday's headline and who's got caught up in this, and being a little bit off center with time and place allows you to be full-throated and not worry about exactly what the constellation of the truth is. It helps.
Is there any sort of temptation, because you are in a period where if you wanted to, there could be characters experiencing housing discrimination courtesy of Fred Trump and young Donald Trump. There are ways that you could have brought that into the story if you wanted to, but I can also understand completely why you would want to avoid the hell out of that.
I mean, if it came up, we would have that moment. If we literally bumped into but we're not in Queens. We're not, real estate is actually a huge part of season 3 because when the beginning of the transformation away from what Times Square was, but that's really a story about not so much about Trump as it is about that moment when all of the profit of the old New York was dwarfed by the potential of the new New York. It's like, and so there's a wit to saying, I think, if we do it right, there's a wit to saying all of the moralizing in the world, all the police work, all of the, we're going to clean it out, we're going to do this, we're going to declare, we're going to regard this as a moral equation. Never solved a thing for 30 years. What got rid of the old Times Square, but not pornography, of course. That's because it just went to become a $5 billion industry. But so the moralizing didn't work, but land values and the capacity to make more money with the real estate ended it. So there's something funny about that. The idea of like, I don't know, we can make more money by moving this into your living rooms, and so there's something fun to be done. But I'm not like, where can we get Trump into the story? It's like, again, you could see yourself pulling yourself out of shape to land a punch, and it's not worth it.
Well, Robert and Michelle, I want to go back to what David was saying about sort of the idea of forcing this down the gullet of what would be otherwise a story. It ceases to be a story at a certain point if it's just someone yelling into the void about Donald Trump. Were there challenges to that in this past season where a lot of it is someone yelling into the void about Donald Trump?
No, because that was part of the point, which was Christine Baranski felt alone in the world, that she was the one screaming. So probably by being a little meta about it, we were. I think we're always trying to find a connection between the loss of guardrails and the impact of technology on the loss of guardrails and how it affects the law. So there was one where there was, Alan Alda played it this year, where he played a lawyer who seemed to be going senile because he was asking all these strange questions of a witness on the stand about, had he ever been involved with dogfights and everything? And you were wondering, well, why the hell is he doing that? And then it realized that he was using Facebook to micro-target the jurors with false news about. So in other words, exactly what the Russians were doing in the election, we found that is a worry about. You can easily use the Facebook technology to micro-target fake news that you create to support whatever argument you're making in court, and do it without your fingerprints being on it at all. So I think when you change up, there's other ways to get at it. And also not only to get at it, not to land a punch or anything, but to also look at the ways the last 2 years are affecting all the other things we trust and all the other things we should worry about. What do you think?
Yeah, and I would say the biggest fear in our writer's room is earnestness. So we're very conscious of that. And we're satirizing the left almost as frequently as we are the right. So I think we managed to skirt that.
Well, when you're in the process of kind of ripping something from the headlines as literally as you did this past season, do you have to make peace early in the process with the idea that if you're addressing this one grotesque thing that happened, that 25 more grotesque things will have happened in the interim while you were editing, that it's now become sort of a thing in the past?
Well, it is one of the advantages of working so close to the premiere date of the episodes. We're often, our mix is only a week before, but we've finished shooting, at the end, we were finished shooting 3 weeks before the air date. I know. It was crazy. So you were able to adapt. I mean, there was an episode we did where the left wing is interested in the pee-pee tape, the golden shower tape, and anyway, they're pursuing that. And there was a very long monologue given by Margot Martindale about how the Stormy Daniels thing was reported on by the Wall Street Journal, and that just disappeared. And so we had to go in and ADR, the change, because it didn't go away. It did. So our expectation a month before was that Stormy Daniels felt like it was disappearing on us, and then Stormy Daniels became her own publicist, as her lawyer did, and it became in the news again. So you're always just having to tweak things just to make it make sense. And you're also worried, by the way, that you're going to be trumped by reality. So that answer your question? I didn't. Okay.
Well, David, how crazy does that process sound to you?
That was terrifying. I mean, we're like, again, that's why, I'm always either the safety of a period piece or narrowing the focus so that I'm just like, in my mind, the political show is never going to see the president. We were not going to, you might see him on a screen in somebody else's office, but I was really going to stay close to House, Senate office, House, and corridors and, places on K Street. I was really not going to go to the White House if I could avoid it, or just go to the edge of it. So, for that very reason, because I felt like, man, I'll always be chasing my tail like that, and our production deadlines are often, the window is often distant from when you're broadcasting, so it's even making you more vulnerable. I feel like the pieces work when it comes out and then there's stuff that happens in the news after it, because you've hit something that is always going to be a stress point. Like with Show Me a Hero, I remember at the moment that it was being broadcast, 2 towns higher up the river than Yonkers, it was Tarrytown and it was one other, were having the same fight about building low-income housing, and the same rhetoric was being thrown around by the politicians. And I thought, oh, good. Like there was a reason we did that, and like it's never going away. And when that happens, I feel like, okay, I've done something that's been generic enough, but pointed enough that it worked. I don't know. I mean, it's like trying to actually stay in step with the reality seems terrifying to me.
Well, you have like 40 years of cushion for the Deuce. You had 20 plus on Show Me a Hero. You had a few years on Generation Kill. You had a few years on Treme. How many years past this do you think we're going to have to be before there's going to be any sort of retrospective?
I would say if we don't get a handle on it, if something doesn't change in terms of how we keep the money out of our political system, and how we keep the money out of distorting our media culture for purposes of routing power and maximizing profit. Until we figure that out, the idea of worrying about where 40 years, like we're all going to be, it's not going to be a TV show. We're going to be like staging it as a 7-part, play in the recreation yard in Guantanamo, because, I mean, like, we're either going to get a handle on this, or all of the premises by which things are going to stay the same in American life are not. It's, what we assume. It's like a Vonnegut story. It's like, you're in a Vonnegut story and you're like, I think, I always remember this moment in a Vonnegut novel, I think it was Slapstick, where the president of the Midwest, because America's been disassembled at this point, is reading a history book, and he comes up with the collect, those who don't read history are condemned to repeat it. And he's doing this in a world where, like, every day gravity is different. Like some days you can't get out of bed, some days you can fly. And the guy who hears him say this goes, like, you pompous, like, what history book was going to tell you that we were going to up gravity, But in some way, like, politically now, at this moment in America, we are fucking with gravity. And so I can't speak to, like, what the narratives are going to be. The narratives may be intensely controlled in terms of where the money goes and what stories you're able to tell.
And on that terrifying note, let's get to some questions from the audience. So just raise your hand if you got questions, and we can. Anyone?
Hey guys. To Michelle and Robert, I really have liked on The Good Wife and on The Good Fight that you do represent people like Lamont Bishop and the wife killer, and especially in the ride-along episode this season, the moral ambiguity of it. What's that process like in the writer's room and navigating that?
We have. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we have a terrific group of writers, and for example, when we were doing The Good Wife, one of the writers, her father had been a drug dealer, so there, she was able to provide some insights into, yeah, you can be a criminal and a family person. These things, aren't always separate. And that's just our experience of life as well. People aren't just one thing. We will have dreadfully nasty attorneys, like the one played by Michael J. Fox, who's really a swell guy at home. And so that just mirrors our version of reality.
With the ride-along episode, I think you went into that episode, we know what our audience is thinking usually, which is, oh, the cops are going to be assholes. And so what you want to do is lead them down that path and then show, no. The liberal lawyers who are doing the ride-along misunderstood completely. And it all is just trying to be not cliche. Whenever you see a network show, there's a priest, he's going to end up molesting a child, or it's going to be revealed in his past. It's better to go the route that you don't expect, because A, that's life, and B, it just is surprising. The audience isn't sure where, to use your word, they don't know where gravity is in the episode. Usually there's a real network, like Three Little Bears quality to it. This happened, then this happened. And so that expectation is what comforts you and allows you to fold your laundry when you watch the TV show. But what's fun and keeps you awake is when you're not sure whether the writer, A, what they're thinking, and B, they may be trying to discover something as they're writing it. That's the one where you're kind of like, oh, shit, what's going to happen next?
Well, that's been sort of a principle of yours as well. I mean, you've always sort of...
I don't like it when they fold the laundry. I don't like I resent it.
Well, but I mean, in particular, making audiences have to have their expectations of certain character types cheated or entirely, flipped.
You start with... Everything starts somewhere that, Generation Kill is a war movie. It's also a road movie. The Wire is a cop show. I mean, you're starting with these tropes that exist, and they exist for, inevitable reasons, and maybe even necessary reasons. And then it's what you do within them, and where you and what you have to say about them that differentiates whether or not the story was worth following. The only rule that I have that I'm not afraid of landing in a world that you think you know, as long as I have something else to say about it, as long as the writer's room is capable of being fresh about, and we had a reason to be in that world. But at the end of the day, the only metric that I have that really works is, did the story say what we believe? And was it consistent? Like, did we hold to theme? And the first 2 weeks in the writer's room, nobody puts up a card. We haven't defined the characters yet. The first couple weeks are always, why are we doing this show? What do we want to say about X or about Y? Okay, we have this material. This guy came to us with this stuff about Times Square and the rise of pornography, and when it went from being sort of in a brown paper bag to being street legal. That's interesting, but why are we doing it? Because that's a big question. And the answer in a lot of writing rooms and in a lot of network offices is always because we think it can sustain itself, because it might be a franchise, because so-and-so's attached, because the first script crackles, It's not, ask yourself what the last scene, where you're going to go in the end. What we've said, that's epic. That's where the heavy lifting happens in the room. Why are we telling the story? What are we going to say?
And if you have questions, come up at there we are. Excellent. Come on down.
Hey. My question is, I guess the premise is basically about the fact that the mainstream media, where people traditionally have gone for information, seems to be very focused on entertaining us these days, so it's hard to know where to go for actual information. So that being the case, I guess I'm just curious, given that, I guess has that shifted where you feel like maybe you have a responsibility to inform more because there's less places to get actual information, and or do you think that the storytelling, what has traditionally been storytelling and entertainment, A, can inform, or B, has a responsibility to inform more these days?
You'll say something funny. Yeah, Michelle.
I guess I believe that there's still mainstream media doing a terrific job putting out information. So, I'm going to the New York Times or the Washington Post and, many other news sources. And so I personally do not feel an obligation to do their job. It's characterizations and storytelling and sometimes satire.
Yeah, I mean, our hope is we just want to entertain, and politics to us is entertaining. The worry is when the writers' room wants to teach, and we're always just like, we're always trying to avoid immigration stories because there's no way we can feel that it's a debate in the show because we land so much on one side of it. Same thing with capital punishment. So the show we've tried building in the writers' room. It's just like you're reading it going, oh my God, I am bored to death. So holding people's interest is more important than getting across, because, no one really wants to be taught. No one, even in school, people don't want to be taught. So, the bottom line is if you can hit or get across thoughts, but debating thoughts like George Bernard Shaw kind of thoughts in the process of telling a fun story, the audience, I think, is much more ready to absorb or be interested.
Well, David, in the 5th season of The Wire, you sort of focused on journalism for a lot of that season, and it felt at the time like it was you working out some cynicism about the reporting of the truth and how journalists sometimes can steer stories. As you look back on that storyline, does it feel like it would be even more extreme today if you were to be doing the similar thing?
The storyline was basically saying, it was putting the coda on the whole show and saying, while all this other shit was happening and while we were misdirecting all of our policy and all of our efforts, and while we were buying, this this metric and this false premise about the drug war, about poverty, what were we paying attention to, and where was the intellectual critique and the journalistic critique? So the last thing we wanted to do was say, what were we paying attention to and what were we not paying attention to while this America, came undone in this sort of metaphor of the city. I think in some respects that critique that media has been failing at points, it works in some respects. It works in the regional newspapers, which have been eviscerated by Wall Street, and where the revenue stream has died. So if you're here, I actually have not read the Austin paper in a good while. I don't want to make it local, but it's certainly in Baltimore. The paper is really struggling. 100 people are trying to do the job that used to be 600. They're not covering as much. They're getting to some of it. They're still very committed, but Tronc is stealing, is taking the money and it's giving it to its executives and it's giving it to the shareholders, and it's not replenishing. There's no regard for the future or for the mission of journalism. Again, capital. If profit's your metric for judging whether something's good or bad, this is the society you're paying for. So that there is a failure. And no, I don't think television drama can step in. Look, it's taken me 4 years to do just one thing, one allegory on sexual commodification. So great, I've gotten one issue surrounded and I get to say everything I want to say. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is coming in waves. So that's my point about you can't be, we can't replace the power of daily journalism, nor should we. What has to happen is we have to solve the revenue stream. And everybody has to support this as being elemental, because a democracy can't function without a constant stream of self-critique. Yes, on the other hand, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they've solved their existential crisis of why you go into journalism and why it matters. They're chasing an administration that's fairly lawless, and they're about the only people that have the gravitas to do it right now. Congress certainly is not doing any oversight. So, in some ways, journalism feels a little bit, as you were saying, a little healthier than it did maybe in the run-up to the election. I'm sort of proud of some of journalism and what they're trying to do at the high end. But man, it's been hollowed out, and there's so many empty desks in so many newsrooms, and no, we're not going to fix that with the entertainment industry. That's not going to happen.
Hi. Oh, I have to stand up. This question is for David. Going through all the characters that you've had on your shows, from The Corner all the way to The Deuce, I would imagine that you might have gotten some backlash from certain communities about the portrayals of dope dealers, rappers, and all that. I read something recently where you were saying that you really wanted to show why people are in certain situations and why they just can't pick up and move and why they may deal drugs, which I think really got the point across. But I know that there's a lot of blissful ignorance that's still out there, which is obvious, and that we're finding out more and more each day with politics and just things going on in the news. I guess I'd really like to hear a little bit more about that and about why, where this comes from in you.
Yeah, this is the part of me that is not. I wasn't trained for the entertainment industry, nor are the metrics. Obviously, if the metrics of the entertainment industry were mine, I might have viewers. Because you're looking at somebody who's gone as far in his career as you could possibly go and not having anybody watch the shows while they're on the air. It's amazing I still have a job. I'm not, at any moment I expect HBO to go, it's been nice, but pack your bag. But the truth is, like, I'm not interested in what, like, I used to marvel at, like, the Law and Order franchise, because they were all the murders were in Manhattan, not in the outer boroughs. And it was always like rich white people killing people for the most obscure sexual dynamic. It was like, she was sleeping with him. And like, you're just watching it going like, people kill people because they don't have money and because they're marginalized. That's where the murder rate goes. So, show me people who are marginalized in the city and county of New York or Brooklyn, and you're going to be in, in the projects, you're going to be in Morningside. Not anymore, by the way. Not anywhere in Manhattan. It's all money. But you're going to be out in East New York. I mean, it follows poverty. It always has. So that part of me is like, I'm not going to lie to you about, if I'm doing a show about violence, I'm not going to lie about where the violence is. So once you stop telling that lie of like cleaning it all up and making it racially comfortable for everybody, then you're obligated to present context. Now, does it succeed with everybody? Here's the horror of doing this business, which is I can't write for the Breitbart sucking troll who's ready to strain everything through his pre-existing racism and then comment on it. I can't write for that guy. I'm never convincing him to be any better than he is. It's a long day's journey for a human being to come out of that hole into any degree of awareness. Not saying nobody does it, but I'm saying I don't have an equation where I can give him 12 episodes and go, here, this will fix you. So if I write for that guy and I try to like explain everything in the most lead him, then the story itself becomes fraudulent with exposition of, it's like the characters all start speaking about like, on The Deuce, all of the guys who were the 8th Avenue pimps were African American in 1972 or 77. There was, or Latino by 77. So like we're following the actual oral histories that we have. We're actually doing the characters we know existed. And there's a part of me that winces and says, man, this is just grist for the assholes. And I can't, but on the other hand, if I don't do the pimps as the dynamic actually worked, I'm cheating sexual commodification. I'm actually taking, and it's a horror show of knowing that The Wire exists as a framework for arguing policies I believe in about ending the drug war or mass incarceration. Like, it exists in the way I intended it to, and it's grist for the things I wanted it to happen. But I also know that if I go to any racist site on the internet and click in The Wire on their search function, I'm going to find it being, used in the most flattened version of, this is how black people do. Look how they fucked up Baltimore. Yeah. I can't write for. If I write for them, it all goes to shit. But I know they're there, and it's really, it's disheartening on one level. So I heard that in your question.
Thank you.
Hi there. So in a world where it seems like, the political news is apocalyptic on basically a daily basis, I'm wondering if you see maybe the entertainment industry making a big pendulum swing in the near future. So like it did during the Depression or George W. Bush, like, will we have our next West Wing? Will we see like a optimistic vision of either an imagined present or a future, or if we're looking toward the past, towards successful stories of political activism, sort of in that, I think there's this hunger to provide hope for the future, and I'm wondering where you see that going in Hollywood.
Writers I hear from are being told in pitches, don't pitch towards the coasts, which I think is the Roseanne effect. I don't know if that's changed since the cancellation of that series. But I think there is a sense of, there might be a tendency to go rah-rah, like Top Gun is coming out again. There might be a tendency to go in the direction of trying to find optimism in, a patriotic, make America great again. So I don't know what's happening. That's happening probably at the network level. I don't know what's happening at the streaming level. And Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, you may well be right. Those shows probably won't come from anyone sitting on this couch, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to show up.
Well, is there, as you're working on this congressional project that you've mentioned, is there any part of you that has the temptation to go, not, I don't want to say Capra-esque, but I feel like when we think of what Capra-esque actually means, we think of we think of one version of what Capra-esque means, whereas Mr. Smith Goes to Washington has a lot of cynicism to it that people don't remember, and It's a Wonderful Life has a lot of darkness that people don't remember. Do you have that bone in your body at all, or
And
not?
Dickens has a lot of reality about the Industrial Revolution and poverty, but at the end, there's always some fucking uncle who, adopts the kid, and it all, I mean, there's, Little Nell. It's all going to end well, and that is that the oversold notion of redemption is never going to go out of style. So I think, that's Capra did it better than almost anybody. Here's all of the attendant risk and horror of American society, but in the end, the angel's going to get his wings, and so. I'm much more interested in that moment of, one of the films that I love about politics, the original All the King's Men and that novel, I think it's one of the great American novels, truly top 5 at least. But on a more modern sense, is that moment at the end where we elect the guy who we think we like in Robert Redford in The Candidate, and he looks at the camera and says, what do we do now? To his handlers. I'm much more interested in the systemic, and because I think the systemic is what we're beholden to, and what we either fix or we don't fix it. We either attend to it, and okay, I'm about to say something like this is as comforting as I can get. I'm Jewish. My father, my late father, he had one thing that he drilled into us every Passover Seder, Jewish holiday. It's about the Exodus from Egypt. That's what the holiday is about. And he said, this is elemental to every political moment that you'll ever face. This is how my father talked, by the way. It was that kind of household. But he said, freedom can never be completely won, but it can be lost. And that's what I'm like, that whole idea of every day you get up and you got to kill a few snakes. And it'll never be a world without snakes. But you got to kill a few every day or you'll be overrun. That's the only way democracy works. It's never about and now we fixed it. That moment never comes. You want to have governance, collective governance by the people. It's going to be every day we get up and we fight to make it a little bit better or a little bit less worse. And that sounds disheartening, and it's no way to write a movie ending.
you can't, that sounds like it's perpetuity. Maybe long form. It's maybe better for us than for guys making features. But that's really hard. That's really hard dramatically, the idea of every day you got to kill a few snakes. But that's the world. And so I'm not sure that anything we can deliver is going to change or become more helpful or more precise. I think we will fall back on tropes of this will all go away and the great man theory of history. If we just elect the right guy, this is not about this is not because we elected the wrong guy, although we did. This is about what's broken in the system that this could possibly be a choice, and that dealing with that is really hard for the likes of us.
Well, I feel like that is as positive an ending as we could have. So thank you to David and to Robert and to Michelle. Thank you very much for coming.